I always thought saying they were heartless was a metaphor for their cruelty and lack of feeling, but it seems that they quite literally mean biologically they're born heartless. At least, I think that's what this means. And I wonder if this is what makes Manon special or different, is that she was actually born with a heart.
Hi everyone! Welcome back to the Booked Off Fantasy podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today we are continuing our Heir of Fire coverage with chapters 44 through 47, and I was literally on the edge of my seat for this set of chapters because I was nervous. I was so nervous. I knew no one was going to die. But, being chased by nasty creatures and skinwalkers is something that I never want to experience.
Oh, yeah. I literally wanted to throw up the whole time. I was so anxious, especially like the jump scare when she's holding the dagger. As soon as she took that dagger out, I was like, it's right behind you. And yeah, I felt like at no point did I know where that was going to go. Obviously, I knew once the creature came, I'm like, oh, it's going to go down. But especially when they took off running, I was like, this is not going to end well. So I'm happy they escaped. Yeah, exactly. Not a big fan. So I'm happy they survived for now. Now. We'll see how much longer.
Yeah, you're not safe for the whole rest of the book yet, but for now, they are. As a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 44 through 47 specifically. But it is likely that references to all the books we've covered so far will come up as well. This includes TOG, COM, and TAB. If you haven't finished these books and you don't want spoilers, please pause here and then come back when you're caught up. Otherwise, the series is brand new to us, so you won't be getting any spoilers for the rest of the series, but you will be getting plenty of unhinged theories. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. We got our very first text message.
Yay!
So thank you, Joyce, for sending us a message. It was literally the highlight of our week. And we decided we were going to read it today. So Joyce texted us and said, I really love your show. I finished the TOG series, but enjoy hearing your wild theories and reliving my first read through you guys. The audio sounds great, and I appreciate all the hard work you put into finding tiny details. I can't wait to listen to future episodes.
Oh, thank you, Joyce. You're the real MVP. Also, just doing a wellness check. Are you okay? Because I saw that you texted us at 4 a.m. So I just want to make sure that you're okay. Also, you may be asking Addison, how do you know that? I was also up at 4 a.m. So that's why I'm doing a wellness check. I don't know if I just woke up and I was just, honestly, I woke up and I was like, ooh, we posted a new episode. I'm going to see how many people listen to it. And then I saw we got a text.
I have never been up at 4 a.m.
Never in your life?
Well, not never, but like recently.
Okay, I was like,
not on that schedule whatsoever.
It's not my preference. Definitely not my preference.
But point being, thank you, Joyce, for texting us. And thank you to everybody that's left any kind of review so far. If you guys go to our social media pages, we have been updating and posting those there. So you can find your shout out. And then to continue, if you are reading along with us, then next week's Heir of Fire episode will cover chapters 48 through 52. Next, Addison, where are we at with the Onyx Storm countdown?
Okay, today is October 23rd, and there are 90 days until Onyx Storm is released. So we're officially under 100, and I feel like the days are going really fast now.
We say this every single time.
I know.
Indeed,
I'm like,
it is.
It won't be long before Zayden Ryerson and I are reunited.
Zayden.
I know.
Zayden.
I'm almost done with Iron Flame for like my 4th time. And no spoilers, but I'm not okay. Not okay about anything.
Oh my gosh. I think I got like 3 chapters into my Iron Flame reread, so I need to keep reading, but too many things to do.
Ugh, I know.
Not enough time.
Also, in the world of Onyx Storm, Rebecca Yaros's account officially released an excerpt or kind of blurb for the back. So if you haven't read that, definitely go check it out because there is lots of exciting, I guess, speculation, even based on that tiny, tiny little set of sentences.
Oh, I do remember seeing that. I haven't analyzed it yet, but
What?
I think I saw that post.
Why do you think I was up at 4 a.m? Because I was just thinking about it.
Well, go ahead. What are you thinking about?
Did we tell you right now?
Sure.
I'll make a reel about it.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, go check out our social media pages for Addison's hot take at some point soon.
Just be 30 seconds of me screaming.
Oh, okay. And then last but not least, if you are enjoying the show, definitely leave us a review and share it with a friend. And right now, here's what we would like you to do. Open up whatever app you are listening through and then just pop in a rating right now while you're thinking about it. If it's safe to do so. Don't do this while you're driving. But if you're chilling at home or, I don't know, hanging out and you feel inclined, leave us a review. Alternatively, as we just said, you can send us a text message by clicking on the link in the episode description. It very plainly says, send us a text message. So go ahead, send us that text. Share your theories.
Do it.
Feedback. Whatever you would like to say, we will be here to receive it. All right. So now let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report for chapter summaries, and then we will dive into an analysis and offer theories for each chapter. And finally, we will share our favorite moments. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Chapter 44. Manon's persistence and determination were paying off. In fact, things were going so well, it almost seemed too good to be true. Spoiler alert, it in fact was. Manon was summoned to her grandmother's room, and that's when the trouble started. Granny Blackbeak is pissed because she was the last to know that Abraxos hadn't made the crossing, and because he had not done so, Manon and Abraxos weren't even eligible to be the wing leaders. And to top it all off, just today, she found out that Iskra caught a god's damned Kraken spying on them. Mother Blackbeak tells Manon that she will make the crossing tomorrow, and she had better win those games, because if she didn't, she was dead meat. Every witch at the Omega gathered to watch Manon and Abraxos attempt the crossing. In an awe-inspiring and epic moment, Manon and Abraxos hear a 2-note beat, like a thudding heartbeat or the flapping of wings. It was the babies. The sound swelled, and Manon told Abraxos that he was hers and she was his, and they would be together until the darkness cleaved them apart. Not ominous at all.
Very cute, though.
Abraxos raced for the drop, and suddenly they were going down into hell, into eternity. Abraxos unfurled his wings, and it was with those wings, with glimmering patches of spider silk, that sent them soaring up the side of the Omega and into the starry sky beyond. Chapter 45. Rowan watched with great surprise as Celaena used the magical wards surrounding Mistward to quite literally fight herself. When she got knocked on her ass, none of the sentries laughed, and he wondered if it was because of his presence or because of her. He got his answer a heartbeat later, as he waited for her to shout or shriek or walk away, but the princess just slowly got to her feet and kept practicing. Each passing day, Celaena got stronger and faster, so strong and fast that she knocked Rowan on his ass a few times, much to Addison's delight. But Rowan never relented, just as her enemies would not. The next corpse showed up a week later. Rowan and Celaena put on their CSI hats and headed towards the crime scene. Celaena noticed several important things and had the horrifying realization that this creature shared the same black blood that the creatures she and Dorian killed in the catacombs beneath the library. More importantly, she realized that the one she killed was defective, and that's why it had been left behind, but now perhaps the others had been perfected and were here in Wendlin. She quickly tells Rowan about the creature in the library and the word keys and how the king was using them to make these beings. They come to the conclusion that the Demi-Fae would make the perfect host because of the magic in their blood, and the fact that no one in Wendland or Dornell cared if they lived or died. With a feral grin, Rowan told Celaena that they were going hunting. After several hours of fruitless search, the two huddled together in the trees, Rowan sharpening his blades as Celaena told him in excruciating detail about the creature in the catacombs. But thoughts of Chaol kept clouding her mind until she finally asked Rowan if Chaol was truly her mate, she wouldn't have been able to hurt him the night Nehemia died. Rowan tried to answer the question in a roundabout way, but when he asked Celaena if she wanted the truth, she simply responded, "Not tonight." Chapter 46. The next day, they returned to the site and retraced their steps. They quickly discovered an area near the beach that would be the perfect spot for Adarlan to sneak in a ship or two and bring in their insidious cargo. Rowan tells Celaena if they're going to explore, they will do it under the cover of darkness. Later that night, Rowan used his hawk horn to spy and discovered 200 mortal Adarlanian soldiers, and not one, not two, but 3 of those horrible creatures under the command of General Narok. They then realized several important things. The first, they picked this location specifically because it would lead them straight to Mistward, and that the Demi-Fae had been their target all along. The second, they were outnumbered and outmatched. It was then that the smell hit her. One of the creatures was coming straight for them. They quickly made a plan, and Celaena waited. Just as she was starting to think Rowan was mistaken, the creature appeared between the trees. The creature scented the air and stepped closer to her, and Celaena had a horrifying thought. What if the creature had gotten to Rowan first? She dared another glance around the tree, but the creature was gone. Or was it? Psych! Chapter 47. Where could that creature have gone, you ask? Right behind her. Celaena moved to swipe with her daggers, but its black, depthless eyes met hers, and Celaena froze. In her body, her mind, her soul, her magic sputtering and going out. The creature put Celaena into some weird hypnotic death trance, and it was only when Rowan grabbed her that the spell was broken. Realizing that they were out of their depth, they decided to make a break for it. Mile after mile they ran, but the creature did not stop. It was then that Celaena told Rowan she had an idea. Celaena told Rowan to keep the creature occupied using the scent from her tunic while she lit a fire and sharpened her blade, all the while humming a symphony. It wasn't long before an unearthly stillness and the stench of carrion filled her nostrils, that she willed herself to stand and greet the 5 skinwalkers that stood before her. Before they could surround her, she burst into a sprint. Meeting Rowan at the predetermined spot and using his wind to blow her scent away, they quickly hid and waited. For the better part of half an hour, the creatures fought in the rainy dark until those wretched shrieks turned victorious and the unearthly roars sounded no more. Celaena and Rowan held each other tightly and did not dare close their eyes for the rest of the night. Woo! That was a long night, not in a good way, you know what I'm saying? Not the kind of holding I was hoping for, you know?
I know in any other circumstance that might have been kind of nice, but
yeah, kind of romantic, kind of hot. And instead it was like, oh, they were literally holding on to each other for dear life, quite literally.
No kissing in this tree today. Okay. Well, thank you for those summaries. And without further ado, let's get into the analysis. But before we get started, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Of course. Of course. I now feel like I must come up with something because that one time I didn't. It just felt sad. So I found a way. I found a way for you guys. Pretty quick kind of overarching thought here. And I think this is probably will be the general sentiment of anybody reading this set of chapters. But I feel like this is finally where all the pieces are starting to fall into place. The dots are getting connected. We're finally seeing where this is going to lead. And to be honest, I am scared shitless. I do not see how we're going to get out of this. I do not see how we can win. If Celaena and Rowan can't get it done, what are a bunch of Demi-Fae that have never seen combat going to do? I don't think we can rely on Wenlin showing up or anything. And yeah, I'm concerned. I'm very concerned. I'm very anxious about the next set of chapters because I feel like the attack is coming. I feel like that's pretty heavily implied in the set of chapters. And secondly, Lorraine, I'm sure you will agree, these creatures are nightmare fuel. The morbid part of me wants to look at fan art so I can visualize them better as I read. But also, I do not want to visualize them better as I try to sleep. So I'm really torn there.
No, they sound awful and I don't like them. Yeah. And I don't want to beat them. I don't even know if there is a good way to draw fan art. I feel like maybe a lot of people may interpret it kind of different, but I don't know.
It's something about the eyes. I don't know. In general, like in fiction, nonfiction, when they're like, they have dead eyes, or I don't really watch horror movies or anything, but any kind of thrillers or murder mysteries I've watched, when they get that dead, cold look in their eye, it really freaks me out. And so I can imagine these creatures, when they describe their eyes, I'm just like, so yeah, Yeah, I'm going to try not to think about it too much.
Ooh, same. But unfortunately, I'm sure we're going to keep meeting them
Probably
for the rest of the book. Maybe even longer.
I know. The question is, are we going to figure out how to kill them? That's the important thing. If we can find a way, I would feel a lot better.
I know. I do wonder if maybe it'll be related to Celaena's fire, but maybe not.
I don't know. I really have no idea. I just don't feel like we've had enough interaction with them yet.
True. All right. Well, let's get into the main part of our analysis then. Starting with chapter 44. I titled this one, He Fly High, No Lie, Manon Knows This. Soren.
I swear that's your favorite part of doing notes.
It's fun. It is kind of exciting to think about what to title it, but he did fly high.
He sure
did.
It
Out of there. So the 13 grew stronger and better with each additional day of training, but the war games were approaching fast, and Manon had yet to try the crossing with Abraxos. Fortunately, his new spider silk patched wings proved very beneficial. Abraxos had gotten into a brawl for dominance and had come out on top, and Manon figured everything was going beautifully until she was called to speak to Granny Blackbeak. Granny is pissed for 2 reasons. 1, Manon and her runty wyvern hadn't made the crossing yet, and 2, she had only been informed today that Iskra had caught a Kraken witch spying on them. Notably, in her passionate speech, Granny had mentioned that she needed Manon to win so they could take their rightful place as queens, not high witches, queens of the waste. And Manon was doing her best to ruin it, and both queens and ruin were italicized. I don't want to speculate too much here, but I probably will sound crazy, so here goes nothing. We know we've been speculating on what Manon's distinct eyes mean and how we thought perhaps Manon is going to break the curse somehow. Mm-hmm. What if this is some additional foreshadowing for that, because Manon will become queen and then ruin the wastes by returning them back to their original state.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I similarly kind of had a thought based on this conversation that is not directly related to that, but I guess related to the idea of Manon being special. And so I know we talked about this basically all through Heir of Fire. Why are her eyes special? The stuff with Petra indicates something. But I thought it was interesting when Granny Blackbeak says, when she's asking her about her heart or something, and she says, no, it cannot melt because you do not have a heart, Manon. We are not born with them, and we are glad of it. And I'm sure there's a very long, windy path to taking back the waste and all that. But I wonder if that has something to do with it, too. And I thought also later in this chapter, when Abraxos, as Abraxos plummets towards the gap floor in just a few pages, there's a quote that says, down into hell, into eternity, into that world where for a moment she could have sworn that something tightened in her chest. And I thought it was interesting that there's that line in conjunction with this conversation of, no, Manon, we're literally born without a heart. And I was like, are you though? Was she? I don't know. So all of that is very interesting. And I feel like maybe in a lot of Manon's conversations, especially with Mother Blackbeak, that there's a lot more hidden meaning and kind of symbolism pointing towards why she's so special.
Okay. No, I really like this because I had picked up on the whole born without heart situation. And I agree that it sounded as if Granny was stating all of that literally and not figuratively. But I hadn't connected that to meaning perhaps Manon actually does have a heart. Yeah. So I really like that. And as you like to say, that is canon for me now.
Headcanon.
So
yeah,
exactly.
There's just too many moments so far in the book where Manon has this connection with Abraxos, or she has this thought about Astrid and Sorrel and the 13. And she basically implies that she loves them and cares about them. But of course, Blackbeaks don't feel those things. And I'm like, it kind of seems like you do. And I feel like that is especially evident in this chapter when Granny Blackbeak is basically talking shit and all of the 13 look like they're about ready to fight their way out. You know?
Yeah.
They're like, oh no, we're not going to let you die. We'll literally kill everyone here to protect you. And I'm like, that is not something that someone without a heart does. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's something to it.
No, I definitely agree. And I am waiting to get more information about what that means. But even if Manon doesn't ultimately literally have a heart, she definitely feels love, right?
Oh, yeah.
Based off of, like you said, her interactions with the Abraxos and her 13 and everything. So
she may not know it's love, but it's love, baby.
Exactly. So to continue on, the conversation ends with Granny telling Manon that she will fly the crossing with the Abraxos the next day, which is then sealed with a scratch across her throat and the dark promise of death should she not. The next morning, Manon and a saddled Abraxos await at the crossing with a lovely crowd of witches who, no doubt, were only there to watch her die. Because, let's be real, most of these witches are bitches, except 13.
100% accurate. And maybe Petra. Jury's still out, but I think Petra, she might be okay.
Yeah, she's leaning towards good witch, but the rest of them, not so much. Granny had forbidden Astrid and Sorrel from joining Manon and calls out, "We're waiting, Manon." Manon hopes the spiders have colds on Abraxos' wings, but after hearing the laughter of the other witches, she tugs on the reins and says, "Let's go." Unfortunately, Abraxos was not in the mood, though it wasn't from fear or terror. Instead, he looks over at Granny B and lets out a threatening growl.
Yeah, he does. I thought it was interesting, too, that it specifically pointed out that when everyone is laughing at Manon, of course, the 13 were not laughing, and neither is Petra. And I know we've kind of just talked about this briefly earlier, but we have talked multiple times about the interesting developing relationship between Manon and Petra. And I think that this kind of brief, I can't even really call it interaction, but this brief description really further supports our operating theory that there is something more going on there, right? And I don't know, I wish we got a little more Petra because I just feel like she knows something. And I want to know what Petra knows.
It's all that religious connection or whatever. She's connected to the three-faced goddess and therefore she knows more. But yeah, that relationship is interesting and I'm curious to see how it develops in the future.
Yeah.
Manon is once again stunned that Abraxos could comprehend the situation, but Granny calls out once again for her to get going. The tension is high, and every one of the 13 had their hands on their hilts just in case Granny made the call to put her and Abraxos down. But Astrid gives Manon a nod that gives her, quote, that same feeling she'd gotten when Iskra whipped Abraxos, that thing she couldn't describe, but it blinded her. And as we just mentioned before, this is very clearly a signal that Manon does indeed feel love. She just doesn't know it yet.
Bare minimum, she feels something more than indifference and cruelty, which is what she thinks that she's only capable of feeling.
She urges the Abraxos again, promising that they only had to do it once to shut them up forever. Suddenly, a steady beat from the chain-bait beast below sounds like a thudding heart or beating wings, as if the wyverns down in the pits knew what was happening. Manon feels the beat pulse like phantom wings from the mountain, and Manon briefly thinks that perhaps it wouldn't be so bad to die if she was with him, if she was not alone. Her final speech to him is this: "You are one of the 13. From now until the darkness cleaves us apart. You are mine and I'm yours. Let's show them why." Abraxos huffs into her palm in understanding, and then Manon climbs into the saddle. She knew the spider's love would hold, because there was really no other alternative. She commands, "Fly, Abraxos," and like a roaring star, he thunders down the chute and flaps his wings as he gathers speed. The beat from the wyverns continues and increases as the other witches join in with stomps and claps. Abraxos continues racing for the drop, and with one last shove, he and Manon plunge toward the gap floor below. They go into free fall, and there's a quote that says, "Down into hell, into eternity, into that world where, for a moment, she could have sworn that something tightened in her chest." Manon refuses to close her eyes, and as they near the stones of the gap, Abraxos unfurls his wings and pulls them upward against the downward pull. His glimmering wings remain strong and sturdy as they soar straight up into the starry sky above. And that ends our chapter. And I don't have a ton to say about this other than I guess there was really nothing about the crossing itself necessarily. I don't know. Maybe it's still to be revealed, but I'd previously thought that maybe Abraxos could sense something dark or bad about it, and that is why he resisted flying across it. But it seems like that's not really the case. I guess maybe he was just unsure about his ability to fly across it. So
yeah, I have a hard time actually visualizing the gap, I guess, and why it's so frightening. But there is a description where Manon, and she's talking about how she hopes the spider silk holds because just the sheer force of wind would make the hole shred bigger in his wings. And so I think perhaps Abraxos knew it wasn't necessarily like he wasn't physically capable, but because of the damage to his wings, he wouldn't have been able to make without the spider silk. So it seems like once he was like, okay, my wings are good, I'll be okay. And that may have been his hesitation. But I agree. The way it read back then was like something funky was up with the gap. And I'm still not totally convinced that entire place is not laced with evil. So
right. There could be something.
Also, I just think this scene is so beautifully written. It's just really intense and exciting. And I desperately want to see fan art for this scene. When I picture in my mind, you hear the wings beating and then the 13 joins in and Petra, and before you know it, everyone's cheering and they're making the same beat and jumps off and he takes off and the stupid look on Granny Blackbeak's face. And I would love to see that play out in, I guess real life, but I mean, on TV or something.
Oh, I can't wait. I don't know if this is just, wishful thinking, but if they made this into a show, it would crush.
I don't know. I've seen, a lot about how they're going to make ACOTAR into some kind of TV series. I feel like if ACOTAR did well, they'd be more likely to maybe do Throne of Glass or Crescent City. I think how ACOTAR does will really determine the future. Probably Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, how their TV series plays out. Because if it tanks and there's no market for it, they won't do anymore. But if it does well, it may open the door for a lot of other NSC series, which would be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But aside from that, I agree that I think this scene would be one of those that would be really cool visually.
I really would.
And in addition, I just love the scene in general, just because Abraxos is making so much progress, and the subtle shifts that we see in Manon's relationship to both Abraxos and even for 13, and the way that she feels about them and the way that she treats them and addresses them and everything. As we touched on before, even if it doesn't turn out to be the case that she has an actual physical heart, then figuratively or metaphorically speaking, she definitely is developing an emotional heart, at least. So
she's becoming a big old softie on the inside.
Yeah, she is. So that ends chapter 44. Moving on to chapter 45. And I titled this one, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Over in Mistward, Celaena hasn't stopped practicing her shielding and kick-ass fire maneuvers ever since she made her first shield, and it seems like Rowan may actually be impressed. One morning, he watches Celaena practice from above. He asks the sentries how long and for how many days she'd been practicing, and they respond that this was now the 4th day in a row that she'd been using the Wardstone's magic wall as a training tool. For the first 3 days of her early mornings, Rowan had assumed she was going to the kitchens to help, but he had to admit that Celaena was resourceful as he watched her throw a dagger and dodge swiftly when it bounced back at her. A warrior on a battlefield. My first 2 thoughts for this part were that they are, first off, still sharing a bed, which I think is hilarious. Because she was like,
Lorraine,
you're gonna go on a cot. And then she's like, we're sharing a bed. And I'm like,
Oh, that's right. I had forgotten about that. Leave it to you to point that out.
Yep. That's right. Hopefully soon we can get something a little spicier, but maybe not. They have other things to do first.
Yeah, they got a lot going on.
Second, I do feel that the warrior on a battlefield quote is foreshadowing for a battle that's going to take place later on and likely prominent role within it.
Yeah, that seems very likely. I also thought it was interesting in Rowan's internal thoughts. He thinks, though he fully planned to tell Lorcan, his commander, and the only male who outranked him in Doranel, just to see whether they could use it in their training. I only noted it because I thought it was interesting that rank-wise, he's the only male who outranks him. And so then I was just wondering if it's a character we're going to meet when we ever get to Doranel, and if Lorcan will come up again. I have a feeling, it's just a suspicion, that all of Rowan's cadre, like the 6, defenders or protectors of Maeve, will come up. And so I just noted it because the only other member we've been introduced to or even mentioned is Gavriel. I don't know if Lorcan is part of that cadre, but if he's Rowan's commander, it kind of seems like he is. So I just noted it there because rank-wise, that feels relevant, I would think. So we'll see.
Yeah, I will say, well, as people that exist on the internet, I have seen Lorcan's name before, but interestingly, literally the only thing I ever see about it is a joke of people just being like, what is Lorcan doing? That's the only thing I've ever seen.
Really?
It. Yes.
I've never seen that.
I've seen his name, and then it's either something along the lines of where is Lorcan going or what is Lorcan doing? And I'm like, does this never get addressed? You know what I mean? Like, that's so bizarre.
I guess I'm dying to know. Yeah, I guess we'll find out. Or maybe we won't. Maybe that's the joke. You never actually find out.
I guess
so. I want to be in on the joke. I feel left out.
Yeah. I think we'll maybe find out soon enough, hopefully. But
yeah.
So to continue on, the sentries had commented on the unique way Celaena fought, but Rowan doesn't respond, thinking instead about what Maeve would think of a demi-fae learning to use her powers as she was, and that, as we just mentioned, he would have to tell his commander Lorcan to see if similar methods could be used for fae training in Dornell. He then continues watching Celaena, whose technique was mesmerizing, and he notes her master had been a monster. There was no doubt about that. But he had trained her thoroughly. As usual, here is the obligatory fuck Erebin Hamel. But, okay, I can't remember if we've talked about this before, but do we think Erebin was potentially a magical being before or no?
Not that I can recall discussion-wise, no.
Okay. I was just curious about it because I just can't imagine that a regular person could ever teach someone so well that fae are impressed with how she fights and moves, you know? Although I guess on the other hand, we know many fae aren't super well trained for basic fighting since they typically relied on their magic, but
true.
I don't know. It was just a random thought that I had about Erebin's training and the fact that Celaena, just at a basic level, is leagues above even demi-fae and trained fae. So
yeah, that's interesting. That thought had not occurred to me. I'd have to think on it more. My gut reaction is no, he's just a normal human. Like, he may be aware of, I mean, who isn't aware of magic, but he may have a better, deeper understanding. Maybe he knows about word marks and stuff, and maybe that's like his key to magic, but other than that, I really can't imagine what it would be. We just don't freaking know enough about him, honestly.
Where is Erebin Hamel?
What is he doing?
Where has he been?
Where the fuck is he? I'm so angry about this. You have no idea. And I know, I mean, I don't know for sure, obviously, but I feel it in my gut that Erebin's not even going to come up in this book. He's just not going to come up right now. And I'm just, how much longer must I wait for the retribution?
Oh my gosh, I know. Ugh, God, it's going to be so nice when we do meet him and then he is subsequently, I don't know, hopefully killed, but who knows?
Only one way to find out.
Keep reading. Rowan goes back to observing Celaena, who swore and ducked from a ruby flame that had ricocheted back at her unexpectedly. He noticed that none of the sentries laughed, and this was because instead of throwing a fit, she simply got back up and went straight back to practicing. A week later, Celaena and Rowan head to another location of a dead corpse. While traveling, she reflects on how she'd spent every day this week training overtime, since Rowan had never lightened her practices despite knowing she trained in the morning. They'd focused on her firepower, ignoring her drop of water power, which she still failed to summon no matter how hard she tried. Celaena could have sworn their powers played together at times, and there's a quote that says, her flame taunting his ice, his wind dancing amongst her embers. But every day was something new and different. He was still unrelenting and beat her every time, but Celaena could tell it wasn't from malice. Instead, it was to ensure she was prepared because if she needed to pause, if her power faltered, she would die if she ever faced an enemy. Soon enough, her shields were instinctual and she could hurl arrows and daggers of flame together until she knocked him on his ass. And we talked about this a lot last episode, but I think the playing of their powers together is just another hint that Rowan and Celaena could be Karanam, or if nothing else, have some kind of bond that's going to come into play, perhaps.
I don't think, obviously, their relationship has developed enough to really see how deep it goes, but I had the exact same quote pulled out. I threw ooh la la. And then, is this foreshadowing of a romance to come? Is it just foreshadowing that they're going to be good allies in the battlefield because they have complementary powers? Well, complementary and also opposite in a weird way, if that makes sense. And so I just wrote fire and ice, baby. Fire and ice.
Fire and ice. Oh, I love it. Despite her training, Celaena still occasionally dreamt of a brown-eyed man in an empire across the sea and would wake up thinking that she was once again next to Chaol. Remembering that she would never again sleep next to him sometimes made it hurt to breathe. And I did find that interesting just because, honestly, we haven't gotten a lot of her thoughts about Chaol since she first came to Mistward several weeks ago. So it was interesting to me that he still has this massive impact on her. Yeah. And it's sad to read. So
it is. It is. Well, and not only that, but I thought it was interesting because this is the first time I think it's demonstrated how Celaena's perspective of Chaol has changed. Chaol has been briefly mentioned in passing a few times, but it's been very brief, right? It's just like a quick thought she pushes aside. But this was a more developed thought. And honestly, the way it's characterized here, and I think this is something we've kind of talked about a little bit, but ultimately, Celaena realizes that there's just too much between them and it's insurmountable and that they'll never be able to reconcile those differences and overcome the history and everything that happened in the past. And, you know, it seems obvious, I guess, in hindsight, but I still think back to that scene in Calm when they're dancing on the terrace, when they were dancing on the terrace. And there's that quote about like, for just one night, they were just a boy and a girl, not an assassin and a captain of the guard, of someone from Terrace and someone from Outerland. And I just don't think they were ever going to work. They're just from different sides of the train track, you know? And it's just, they were never going to be able to overcome that.
I think it's funny that you say that now because at the time...
I'm sorry. It was literally written like they were soulmates, okay? I was going based off textual evidence and context. And also, I would like to point out that characters are allowed to change. And there's a great quote later where Celaena talks about that the person that went into that deep hole of despair and the person that climbed out are very different. And that's okay. Trust me, the boyfriend that I wanted when I was 16 was not the same person I wanted when I was 26. Okay? I mean, come on, trust me. If you ever need a little pick-me-up and you're feeling bad about yourself, go look up your crushes from high school. Most of them, you'll be like, ooh, I dodged a bullet. I dodged a bullet, to be honest. It's not to be mean, but I'm just
giving you shit, so.
You should. No, you shouldn't. I was going off based off textual evidence, okay? Listen, I still love Chaol. Maybe they'll both continue to evolve and they'll be right for each other later. But in this moment right now, no.
It ain't gonna happen.
It ain't gonna happen.
So Celaena thinks there was nothing romantic about sharing a bed with Rowan. In fact, things were so unromantic that Celaena thought nothing of it as she stripped off her shirt to cool down after arriving at the crime scene. The smell was awful, and Rowan swears as Celaena takes note of a second smell that she recognizes from the site of the first body they'd found and the barrow fields. She quickly realizes that the creature was intentionally targeting Demi-Fae and wonders if perhaps there was more than one of these creatures. Rowan nods in agreement, and Celaena notes small cuts on the victim's hands. They realize that he must have fought back against the creature, which would make him the first one to fight back. She squats down and motions for a dagger, and then another one of their silent conversations takes place, and he growls as he passes her a dagger.
Yup. So I know we talked about this in previous episodes, and we have toyed with the idea that they have some kind of mind-to-mind connection, unconfirmed, obviously, and we don't know what would be the cause of that. But I think it's really important to note here, if you're reading a physical copy of the book, this little exchange is in italics. Mm-hmm. And usually that is meant to imply a different medium of communication. And so I'm going to now call this thought dialogue. And there's been a dramatic uptick in that since they had their little heart-to-heart, and now they're sort of besties, frenemies. I don't even know what to call them, honestly, but that absolutely stuck out to me because it was like a whole 5-sentence conversation.
No, yeah. And they do it, I think,
a couple times. Yeah. I think they do it
within the set of chapters.
Yeah, they do.
I'm going to take that as continued evidence that there is something unique about Rowan and Celaena's relationship with each other.
Yeah.
And that it's going to continue to evolve and probably become a stronger bond in some way. So,
yes, I would agree with that.
She scrapes off some nasty filth from under the victim's nails and she smells it, disgusting, to realize that it smelled exactly like the oily obsidian blood of the creature she'd found in the catacombs under the library back at the castle. So this is where we get like official connection back to that creature.
Yep.
And as we learn, the creature that was in the library catacombs was a failed experiment that they had left behind, essentially, but that the king ultimately had created several successful versions. So,
yes, which is alarming and disheartening. Yeah. It seems so obvious in hindsight now. At the time, when you're reading Calm, you're like, oh, this is the main climax where she goes down, she finds a clock tower, and this is just like an obstacle, right? But in hindsight, it seems so obvious that it's building to something much bigger, which would be he's a failed experiment, and the existence of a failed experiment also implies the existence of a perfected experiment. And anything the king's experimenting with is probably bad.
Exactly.
Retweet. Also, I just want to point out, it's about fucking time that Celaena remembered Dorian existed, okay?
Oh my gosh, I know.
Bro, this little thought where she's like, it'd been a long while since she thought about Dorian. I'm like, yeah, it's been a really long fucking time since you thought about Dorian. We're like basically done with this book. And you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about him. Girl, you're not a very good friend. You're not a very good friend. You just abandoned him there with his evil father, and you're like, oh yeah, I guess he's okay. I hope he's still hiding his magic, bro. Come on.
Yeah, that's literally her only thought is, I hope you hid your magic and that you're safe. Okay, bye.
Yeah. Bye. Now, I will say, honestly, I have sort of forgotten about Dorian because he's just not in this book very much.
Yeah. She checks back in, but there's not really a lot that is progressing for his circumstance.
At least where we are so far, it kind of feels like Dorian's just in this book because he's going to be important later in a different book, and she just wants to make sure we still feel connected to Dorian's character. I'm like, what is he doing? You know, maybe towards the end of this book, he'll come back into play in a bigger way, but I'm just like, oh yeah, Dorian, he and Sorsha.
They're just making out. That is the rule in this story.
Pretty much. Since Celaena is not kissing anybody, it's Dorian and Sorsha's job to provide that for us.
Exactly. I will say, I think Heir of Fire, since we went to Wendelin seems to be the central setting of this book, at least. So I guess in that sense, it kind of makes sense that we don't get as much from Dorian and Chaol even a little bit. But I feel like there is a lot more that could have been done with Dorian's character in terms of either him doing some research or, I don't know, going to do his own little spy session on the king or something, you know?
Literally anything. Literally anything.
Well, anyways, Celaena rushes to the stream to wash out the stench of the dark blood and then quickly tells Rowan about the library creature, the word keys, and Maeve's knowledge of how to destroy the power that the king used to make these things. Rowan asks how it ended up getting here, but Celaena responds that she didn't know and that she'd never forget that smell as long as she lived, like it had rotted from the inside out, its very essence ruined. She goes on to guess that it must have retained some cognitive abilities if it was dumping the bodies. The Demi-Fae made perfect hosts with abilities to use magic, and no one in Wendelin or Dornell cared about them. They wonder why the Demi-Fae would be killed at all, and Rowan wonders if it's because they aren't compatible. So obviously, this is sad that the Demi-Fae are being targeted and killed in this way, but it is interesting because based on what we learn later, we know the creature basically feeds off of and steals the memories and the soul of the bodies in a way. But now, obviously, I want to know, what does being a compatible host mean? Right? What makes the host or whoever it feeds off of compatible versus incompatible.
Yeah, my only, I guess, speculation at this time would be the amount of magic in their blood. Because at the very beginning of Heir of Fire, Luca describes kind of the wide variety, the spectrum of demi-fae there. Like some basically look like mortals and have only a keen sense of hearing or smell, whereas some actually can shift or have magic. And so my guess would be it has to do with how much magic is in their system.
Okay, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Rowan instructs Celaena to burn the body and then says, "We're going hunting." After several hours of tracking for creatures or clues, they found nothing, so they huddled up on a tree branch high above. They stayed in the dark so as not to attract attention, but continued discussing the library creature, every detail and weakness and strength. Rowan begins cleaning his knives, and Celaena definitely takes note of his shifting shoulder muscles, thinking he himself was a beautiful weapon, forged by centuries of ruthless training and warring. She asks if perhaps she was mistaken about the creature being the same as the library one, as she once again gets distracted by Rowan's muscles and concedes to herself, fine. Some very feminine, innate part of her appreciated that. She didn't mind his half-nakedness. He'd seen every inch of her now. She supposed there was no part of him that would be much of a surprise either, thanks to Kale. And I keep thinking about just how awkward that must have been. Like, obviously, it was an extenuating circumstance and she was literally basically dying. But like, just to be like stripped down and totally.
You know, I thought about that. I feel like, honestly, I mean, she was quite literally burning from the inside out. You probably feel so bad you don't even care. You're just like, whatever. I will say from personal experience, after giving birth, you're just like, whatever. I just gave birth to a baby. Everybody's going to see my business and it's fine. You know, you get desensitized. So I imagine in dire medical circumstances, you kind of give up on privacy, you know?
Right. Okay. Fair enough. But
maybe in hindsight, she's like, oh, he's seen me literally butt naked.
And she's like, too bad he doesn't think of me that way. And we're like, you sure about that?
Bro, she's pining for him so bad. She's so thirsty in this set of chapters.
I love it, though. I love to read about it. So Rowan answers that either way, this creature was cunning and lethal, and that if she was mistaken, he'd consider it a blessing. Celaena once again gets distracted, this time by Rowan's tattoo, which prompts another thought spiral about Kale. She didn't want to know what Kale had been doing these past months, or what he now thought of her, if he'd sold information about her past to the king. And then she also wonders if Dorian was safe. Rowan finishes cleaning his knives and rinses himself with some water, which yet again leads to some sidelong glances from Celaena and some naughty thoughts. But again, it's clear Celaena has really been struggling about her feelings and past with Kale, and she wonders maybe she'd been a fool to love a man who served the king. But Kale had been what she needed after losing Sam, after surviving the mines. I did wonder what she meant by that, because I mean, I guess in retrospect, it's easy to be like, I don't think Kale is what she needed. But maybe he just made her dream and hope for the future or something. Because like that was basically their relationship is not grounded in reality. It was just letting themselves enjoy the moment without thinking about the long-term viability of their situation. But I don't know.
Yeah, I also wondered about that. And to be honest, I felt like the way I read it was Sam, at his very core, he was so good. He was so honorable and loving and just the perfect boyfriend, right? And then I think Sam's death kind of shattered her worldview, and she thought the world was just basically a horrible, dark place where nothing good ever happens, which, fair. Sam died, spent a year in Endovir. And then here comes Kale. And because there's a lot of language in Calm about he was the kind of man that people only dreamed of, his loyalty, his honor, etc. And so I think maybe Kale restored her faith a little bit that really, truly good, decent people, men specifically, could exist. And so that's kind of how I took it.
Oh, okay.
I think at the time she thought a little bit what she needed was to be with someone that she could pretend that she could live a normal life and not ever have to face her past. Because there's that kind of talk about, exactly, how Kale would like we'll run away together and we'll start over somewhere new. And that was her plan with Sam too. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with her not wanting to embrace her past and who she really is. And I think Chaol was similar in that way to Sam. And so vicariously through Chaol, she was able to hold on to that dream, in which she now recognizes is never going to happen. Doesn't matter where she goes or what she does. She'll never be able to escape it. It's embrace it and live or die, but embrace it.
That makes sense. And especially knowing that she has finally turned the corner in how she views herself and her acceptance of her past and embracing her power. Yeah, it's easy to see how she could recognize that relationship with Chaol ultimately wasn't or is no longer what she needs and was not going to work out anyway. So
exactly.
She goes on to think about who she was these days and thinks if she felt like admitting it, she actually didn't have the faintest clue who the hell she was anymore. All she knew was that whatever and whoever climbed out of that abyss of despair and grief would not be the same person who had plummeted in. And maybe that was a good thing. So I did really like this internal processing from Celaena, and we talked about it a little bit briefly a bit ago, but she really has come such a long way in being able to reframe her opinion of her power and I think finally learn to embrace the power rather than fear it. And I like that Celaena finally begins to feel at peace with herself, I think, but also is now determined and assured in this decision to confront the king one day rather than ignore it and run away from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was very excited by this quote. I feel like this is a nice window into the transformation that is in progress for Celaena. And it aligns with what we have said about how this book is divided. Part 2, Heir of Fire, is going to be all about her rebuilding and her embracing who she is. And I think this quote is indicative of that. So I'm excited to see how her journey continues.
Rowan puts his clothes back on, and they share another moment of vulnerability as Celaena moves her conversation to a discussion of mates. Celaena says, "You once told me that when you find your mate, you can't stomach the idea of hurting them physically. I tried to kill him. I mauled his face and then held a dagger over his heart. I would have done it if someone hadn't stopped me. If Chaol, if he'd truly been my mate, I wouldn't have been able to do that, would I?" Rowan responds, "You hadn't been in your Fae form for 10 years, so perhaps your instincts weren't even able to take hold. Sometimes mates can be together intimately before the actual bond snaps into place." Celaena figures it's a useless hope to cling to, and Rowan asks if she wants the truth. Celaena only tucks her chin into her tunic and closes her eyes and says, "Not tonight." So, what do you think Rowan was going to say to her truth-wise?
Oh, he was going to tell her there's no way they're mates. He was absolutely going to tell her that. I mean, to be honest, yeah. If they had only had like a flirtation, but nothing had ever happened, you could argue, yeah, sure, they needed more time together and they needed the intimacy, but they were doing it everywhere, in the broom closet, on the deck, 24/7. And if there was any kind of mating bond that was going to occur, it would have snapped into place. I also wonder, this is kind of a tangentially related thought, can Celaena feel a mating bond in her mortal form? And or can she have a mating bond with someone who isn't Fae?
Oh, I don't know, actually.
Yeah, I don't know what the rules are about that. I don't know how that works.
I guess the only context that we've ever gotten sounds to be in relation between two Fae.
Or two demi-Fae, Malachi
and Emrys. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So no indication that a human and a Fae can have a mating bond. And I don't think a human and human can, because mating bonds are kind of specific to being Fae. So I don't know. But yeah, he was definitely going to tell her they weren't mates. And she knows that. I know she knows that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, it's hard to hear. Yeah. It's like when you're 16 and your first breakup and your mom's like, "Well, honey, do you want the truth? Y'all were never going to get married." But you don't want to hear that when you're 16. You thought they were the one. You're like, "We're going to be together forever," and then after some time passes, you're like, "Ew, what was I even thinking?" But in that moment, you don't want to hear the truth.
Very true. And I guess to really answer that, again, we still need more information about the difference between Celaena being in her mortal form versus being in her Fae form, because we just barely get any information about the difference between those two things and what it means for her in terms of her magic and other traits that Fae have versus mortals and yada yada. Although I will say, I'm not going to name the series specifically, but mental communication was a pretty prominent theme in a series prior to a mating bond snapping into place. So
if you know, you know.
I don't know. I may take that as, just more evidence that there is perhaps something coming for Rowan and Celaena. All right. That ends chapter 45. Moving on to chapter 46. I just titled this one, The Infiltration.
That sounds like the name of a Liam Neeson movie.
I know it really does, but it's true. I feel like they went CIA operation on this one, kind of.
Undercover, deep ops. Yeah, for sure.
The next morning, Celaena and Rowan scanned the beach below from the cliffs, having picked up a trail from the latest crime scene. After 30 minutes, they had still found nothing until they spy a curve in a cliff edge that looked like it had been worn down from several pairs of feet. Looking into the water, they also spotted a small break in the reef that normally served as the main defense against an enemy naval force. It was just wide enough for a small raft and led to the perfect shore from which one could enter the country unnoticed. Celaena quickly realizes that all the bodies were dumped, so they were both near the sea and the extensive network of caves they were currently hiding amongst. She couldn't say it out loud, but they already knew that Ottoland ships, men, and those nasty creatures had indeed snuck in to the country. Rowan immediately tells her it's time to leave, noting if they were going to explore, then they'd do it under the cover of darkness. But first, they were going back to the stream to find food, and then they were going to have some fun. After sunset, they returned to the beach where a storm had rolled in, providing the perfect cover for them. Unfortunately, they were not lucky in what they discovered, which was a host of soldiers, as well as the horrible creatures, complete with that awful smell Celaena remembered so well. Upon closer inspection, Celaena discovered that the soldiers were not half feral monsters. No, they were mortal soldiers. All of them aware, disciplined, and ruthless. She knew they needed to get a closer look, so she has Rowan shift and go check. After a tense period of time during which Celaena barely breathed, Rowan swoops out and signals for her to follow into the woods. He quickly relays the following information. There were 200 soldiers and 3 creatures hidden in the cave, which was one of a network of them. Everyone was under the command of a General Narok. The creatures looked like men, but definitely were not. And he has a quote where he says, "Whatever dwells inside their skin is disgusting isn't the right word. It was as if my magic, my blood, my very essence was repelled by them. And last but not least, all of them seemed to be waiting for something." So I did find all of this kind of odd because, as I touched on a little bit earlier, Celaena had referred to the dead bodies as hosts for the creatures. And this did give us some more context about how they look human, but are not. So really it begs the question of, is this an otherworldly creature that inhabits the bodies? Or do they turn into this because of the influence of dark magic? Oh. And that's how they become this pale, human-esque, soul-stealing monster thing, you know?
So are they possessed or are they transformed? Is like the root question. Yeah. I mean, similar. I have a lot of questions surrounding this, as I'm sure you do. We just don't know enough. I also thought it was interesting that Rowan points out, and this is kind of information we probably could have guessed at, but he specifically confirms for us that General Narok, he is like the creatures wearing the skin of a man. So General Narok also is inhabited and or transformed or whatever. But it does seem, I don't know, just based on context, it does seem like Narok is a little more human-esque. Like he's able to command the soldiers and stuff, where the creatures chasing Rowan and Celaena seem a little more, I guess, feral or animalistic. So I'm not sure what that means, but I do think it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition. And then this is probably obvious, but I just have to point it out here. Rowan notices that the hosts of men have an odd smell surrounding them and that he didn't have the words to describe it. This is just further confirmation of what we have speculated. It has to do something with the king and his evil dark magic. Manon smells it. Celaena has smelled it. Rowan smells it. Anybody with a heightened sense can basically, I guess, sense it from smell. I don't think it's a coincidence that anywhere where the king is involved, aka the Omega, these horrible creatures and these soldiers the clock tower, etc. Anywhere the king has touched has that scent. And so just further confirmation of that connection.
Yeah. Celaena couldn't answer what they could possibly be waiting for because she didn't know. But she tells Rowan they had to warn Wendellin's forces immediately. Rowan responds there wouldn't be enough time to get to Varys and urges her to think strategically about their current location. Celaena visualizes the map and her blood chills as she realizes that these Otterlondian forces were going after the Demi-Fae in Mistward. Rowan points out that the dead bodies must have been experiments to learn weaknesses, test compatibility for warping, and ultimately eliminate a potential threat, because if the Demi-Fae were convinced to fight for Wendelin, then they'd make formidable opponents to Otterlin's forces. Celaena tries to suggest she'd march right in there with her magic now, but Rowan says, hell nah, and I agree. Rowan warns her that they would endanger their own lives and that their camps were likely heavily protected using word marks to protect against Fae magic, plus everyone wore iron. We also get one more piece of information. General Narok is, as we just talked about, actually like the creatures and wears the skin of a man, quote unquote. The other 3 creatures are sent out to retrieve Demi-Fae for experimentation and just in general do Narok's bidding, essentially. Rowan had seen a Demi-Fae already in there, but she was too far gone from the creatures, feeding on her life and trapping her in her mind, making her relive whatever horrors and miseries she'd already encountered. Celaena realizes that she would have been fed on as well that day in the Barrows, but quickly begins to strategize what other options there were. They realized the Demi-Fae were the only protection for this area, but Mistward was limited and experienced sentries, and many, like Malachi, were too old at this point to survive a battle. They had walked back into the woods when Rowan suddenly halts, and a moment later, that awful stench of the creature wafts towards them. They quickly make a plan to distract the creature, and the conversation turns mental as Celaena reveals her fear of what could happen to her. Ultimately, she agrees and slipped into the trees because these were their woods and they were warriors.
It was just another instance of their mental speak. Same thing. It's in italics. I mean, I feel like a lot of the times beforehand, it's kind of like in a playful way. It's even described as his eyes seem to say this, her smirk seemed to say this.
Right.
But this just basically seemed like they were having a direct conversation, mind to mind. So that feels more and more likely to me, specifically in this instance.
Yeah, I agree. Suspicious. She had stopped behind a mossy tree when suddenly the creature appears slightly ahead of her. Celaena immediately notes how it felt like a smudge of blackness and silence. It had pale white skin and long, sharp nails like polished black curves. The skin was unnaturally smooth, and beneath she swore she saw glittering veins. She remains utterly still, waiting for Rowan's signal, but remembers how easily the library creature had torn through metal doors as if they were nothing more than curtains. Unlike that one, this creature still had the ability to think, and they were so deadly. The king had only thought 3 were necessary. The creature begins to sniff, scenting Celaena, and takes a step in her direction. She feels the air hollow out, and her nose begins to bleed. But upon daring another glance, the creature was now gone. So that ends chapter 46, and now we will move on to chapter 47. I titled this one, The Ambush.
I was like, also a Liam Neeson movie, The Infiltration and the Ambush.
Celaena swears silently and begins to panic, reminding herself that Rowan was still alive. But when she checks the reflection in her knife, the creature was now right behind her.
Jump scare. Jump scare.
I know, literally. She pivots and slashes with her blades, but this turned out to be useless against the power of the creature, whose stare had frozen Celaena and cut off her magic. The creature pulls off its hood to reveal a young male face of unearthly perfection. He wore a torque of dark words sewn around his neck, and Celaena vaguely realizes that this was the, quote, god of death incarnate. I don't know what that means, but...
Okay, I have some thoughts here. I did think the description of the creature here was interesting. So the first thing is described that he is wearing a torque of black stone. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, as was I, a torque in jewelry is a metal in jewelry. A torque in jewelry is a metal collar, neck ring, or armband consisting of a bar or ribbon of twisted metal curved into a loop. So obviously there's different interpretations and plays on this, but basically it's a necklace. So just in case you were unfamiliar with the word, as I was. But I thought it was interesting that when Celaena sees it, she says it was torque of dark stone, the word stone she briefly recalled. And this is the exact same necklace that the creature was wearing that she encountered in the barrows. So we obviously know word gates and word marks. And I'm like, word stone, what actually is a word stone? So I got in my ebook. And the only other time the word stones has been mentioned is actually in this set of chapters when she is recalling the creature in the catacombs. And she thinks there had been so many cells in that forgotten dungeon beneath the library, beneath the king's word stone clock tower. That's the only other time that it's mentioned up until this point, which I thought was kind of interesting. And we know that the word stone clock tower is likely made of black stone, which is obsidian. And we know that obsidian obviously has some importance. So we can draw a few conclusions from this. The word stones likely are evil or are used for evil given their association, right? We know that the clock tower, it ain't good. It's associated with the king. And especially knowing what we know about Noel and Amaroth, not good. The second conclusion we can draw is that the torques are likely made of obsidian. And obsidian is a stone the gods greatly feared, aka the reference to the original riddle from Calm. So I feel that that is important information. And I think that the word stones are going to come into play because if they're made from obsidian, so are the word keys. I mean, I'm assuming the word gates are made of obsidian. I don't know. There's a lot of different directions you can go with that. But I did think it was interesting that she specifically calls out that he's wearing that. And I don't think he's wearing that just to be fashionable. You know what I'm saying? There's probably some significance there. So maybe it's like a source of power or something.
I do have questions about the word specifically. Everything is described as a word key, a word stone, obsidian of the word, right?
By the word.
Like word by the word, but word in itself, I feel like we've discussed this before and we kind of concluded that the word doesn't seem to be inherently evil or good necessarily. It's just neutral.
It's just the force that governs all life, which is told in TOG.
Yeah. So then I think it's probably important that we are making that distinction about these particular word stones and word keys, for example, being made of the black obsidian specifically, because I do think that, we'll differentiate it from, I don't know, maybe there's other types of word stones or there's other types of word keys or word gates, etc. But the fact that they are specifically crafted out of this obsidian dark stone is what makes it dark and evil.
Oh, I think that's fair to say for sure.
The creature smiles as she begins to hear the screams she had drowned out for so many years. He reaches to brush her neck with icy fingers and says, "Your agony tasted like wine." She feels wind tearing at her body, roaring her name, but there was a promise of sweet darkness in the creature's eyes, and she couldn't look away. She need only surrender to the dark, just as he asked. Suddenly, a flash of silver and steel rips her away from the creature, and it takes Celaena a moment to realize it was Rowan. He bites her neck, releasing her from the creature's dark pull, and she realizes that the demi-fae must have tried to use pain to remind the body of what was real and what was not. The creature huffs a laugh, and Rowan says, "We have to run." Little prompting needed, Celaena flings her magic to create a wall of flame, buying them just enough time to hurtle uphill into the trees. They sprint for their lives toward the Cambrian mountains as the creature stalks them, and Rowan's wind continues to blow their scents, though not enough to lose the creature entirely. Realizing they wouldn't be able to outrun it, Celaena pants, "I have an idea." Making a fire on a forgotten road, Celaena wonders if she had a death wish. She could only pray that Rowan kept the creature sufficiently occupied as she'd instructed. She hums the tune of a familiar symphony as she sharpens her dagger on a rock. And soon she hears the rotting scent and spots 5 skinwalkers in the trees. Putting on her mask of confidence, she says, "I'm glad you received my invitation." And one of them responds, "Faye, bitch. We'll take our sweet time with you." To which Celaena bows and says, "I certainly hope you do," before sprinting off down the road.
The fact that she bows, that's our girl.
Chef's kiss. I know. I will say that was really smart of them to
I know.
just be like, all right, evil creature, fight it out. We're piecing. Goodbye.
Well, as I was thinking about it later, I started wondering if the skinwalkers were intentional because they are creatures of nightmare. And so the creature, it's like the evil, king's creature, wouldn't be able to have the same kind of hold on them because he can't make them relive their worst miseries, nightmares, etc. because they're not mortal. They are creatures of nightmare, right? Like they would enjoy that. I don't know. I thought there was something to that. Plus, they're not really killable. I mean, they can't be killed by mortal weapons. And so even if you just ripped them apart, it would buy them time. But I'm assuming the creature can't kill them with fire like Aelin did. But I thought that was very clever. Bare minimum, it would have bought them some time.
Yeah, I like your point about the skinwalkers also being evil creatures and therefore not being affected by this other creature thing. Because I feel like that's definitely the case, or it feels that way.
Oh, for sure.
But I do wonder, I guess, then what the implication of that is for later. Are they going to kind of continue using skinwalkers moving forward or something to try to defeat these creatures? Because obviously this was one of, at bare minimum, 3 that are on this island or in this area right now.
That we know of anyway.
Celaena speeds for a mile down the steep road, the stench of rotten carrion following her the whole way. She thinks to herself, the key was not to panic. Panic made you stupid. Panic got you killed. As a piercing cry signals Rowan's arrival just as they had planned for their ambush. She dumps her torch where the road curves and hides behind a tree, Rowan's wind pushing her scent down the road. Rowan is then next to her a heartbeat later as the skinwalkers approach down the road, right as the creature approached from the other direction. They climb up the tree, and Rowan pulls her into his chest to hide her scent, of course.
And for no other reason.
Absolutely not. Soon, the screams began as the creatures faced off, and it took half an hour before the screeches turned victorious. Celaena and Rowan stayed in the trees the entire night, not daring to close their eyes. And this rounds out our set of chapters.
Okay, so I did have a quick question for you at the very end. Do you think that the skinwalkers were able to kill the creature?
I don't know. It's hard to say because how would you know unless you go look at it, right?
Yep. Very possibly this will be answered in the next set of chapters. But the only hint that I got was the way it's described is that the screeches turned victorious and the skinwalkers are described as like screechy, and the inhuman or unnatural roar is like the creature. And so that was like the only hint, but honestly I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure. It seems like Rowan and Celaena survived the night and presumably like they're able to go back to Mistward. We'll find out in the next set of chapters, but I was just curious if you thought like the skinwalkers were actually able to defeat that creature, or I guess minimum temporarily maim it or something so it was not able to fight back.
I'm not sure. It would be really nice if they killed off at least one of them. But yeah, I don't know. It sounds like they at least scared it off temporarily. So hopefully, Celaena and Rowan can get out of there without the skinwalkers now finding them again. That's
I did wonder about that. I'm like, oh, good, you got rid of one, now the other. But I mean, I guess Aelin knows she can just torch them, so
true. Yeah, that's a good point. We got to keep reading, I guess.
Stay tuned next week to find out.
Okay, so that ends our analysis portion, and now we just have our favorite moments and quotes to share before we end this episode. So, Addison, what was your first favorite moment?
I really loved in the first chapter of this set where Manon is getting ready to make the crossing and Granny Blackbeak being a bitch. And Manon notices every single one of the 13 was casually reaching for their weapons to fight their way out in case her grandmother gave the order to have Manon and Abraxos put down. Obviously, I don't want that to happen, but I absolutely love the loyalty and devotion they share for each other. And I don't know, the 13, they just seem like a sisterhood in the most brutal, vicious kind of way, but still a sisterhood nonetheless. And it's just really nice to see how they support each other.
Yes, I really love that. And as usual, every time we check in with the witches, it's always a good chapter. And the quote that I liked from Manon's chapter, it was a thought, but it was those wings covered in glimmering patches of spider silk. that stayed strong and sturdy, sending them soaring clean up the side of the Omega and into the starry sky beyond.
Oh, yeah. That is a nice description.
And then my next favorite quote was when Celaena and Rowan are traveling and she's kind of talking about their magic and how their training had evolved. And she thinks she could have sworn she occasionally felt their magic playing together, her flame taunting his ice, his wind dancing amongst her embers.
I knew you'd love that, you little romantic girl.
Little romance freak.
Romance freak. That's better, you little romance freak. Well, to take a totally different turn, I really liked when Celaena comes face to face with the Skinwalkers and she says, "Your 4 friends decided to come uninvited to my last campfire, and it didn't end well for them, but I'm sure you know that already." And then she literally took a fucking bow. And what a queen. What a queen.
I kind of miss Celaena's arrogant, sassy self sometimes.
I know. I'm glad to see glimmers of that. It makes me feel confident that she's getting back to who she was, even if it's a different version. But I know I enjoyed that quite thoroughly. So agreed.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then my final one was also a funny one. And she thinks, fine, some very fine feminine innate part of her appreciated that. And she didn't mind his half nakedness.
And neither did Lorraine.
I certainly did not. Should have been more descriptive. Too bad. Anyways, okay. Well, that now concludes our episode. So thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of the Books and Fantasy Podcast. As always, we are so glad you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and check out our social media pages to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today. So stay nerdy, everyone, and we'll catch you all next week for Heir of Fire episode 10. Bye.
Send us a text. Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers.
I was literally on the edge of my seat.
Wait,
for
you're
this.
frozen.
Frick.
I'm going to keep that in the podcast.
It's the Wi-Fi.
Too good to be true. Spoiler alert. In fact, oh my gosh. Okay.
I'm just on mute because I'm eating popcorn.
Totally fine.